Interesting, I follow Mel because Mel was at the bivalve laboratory in Delaware Bay. And I followed him there. I was looking forward to seeing more octogenarians here than there are. I had the impression that the powers of recollection increased exponentially as the years went on, but I found it was not so.
That's a great line.
And I'm a little disturbed about a couple of my colleagues. Don Pritchett taught here for about 6 weeks one time, and he had to get a map from internet to find out where Duke Marine Lab was. And how to do it. And Argus, you've been here many times. He drove right on past the place. In the newspaper recently, there were some simple tests for Alzheimer's disease. And these fellows seem to fail. And this includes Van Angle. The test I would give was what year was AERS formed? And what month? What date? What was the day? And what was the hour? Van couldn't tell me that. And he couldn't figure out why this was 50 if it was formed in 1949. There's an excellent history back there on the wall. 2 of them, in fact. One by Gene Cronin, and the other one by Lear, and Gene, I forget who the other one was. Oh, Williams, on the early days. It seems that the origin of AERS started at AAAS meetings in Chicago. Nelson Marshall, Willis Van Angle, and Gene Cronin were having breakfast together. And in their discussion, they were mourning the fact that there was an absence of some effective means of communication with the associates in the Chesapeake region and Carolina. And this was a seed that was formed. This was discussed at other times, and then finally, in the middle of March, I had a letter from Gene Cronin asking me to set up a date where we could meet here. We want to invite Don Pritchett to come and tell us all about the Chesapeake Bay Institute, which had formed about that time. There were 22 that met. I don't know who they were. My mind's gone blank on that one. Back on that history of the AERS, Lear writes, the AERS was established efficiently and enthusiastically, with clear objectives and foresight, and it has, by holding firmly to formal procedures, become of obvious value in coordination of research, exchange of information, and the enhancement of estuarine research. That's new to me. When we formed the AERS, our thought was this was to be an informal group, get together, exchange information. If someone had a paper that was ready to be published, let it present it and let everybody chop away at it. If someone had an idea of some research they wanted to do, bring it out. And somebody said, hey, wait a minute, I tried that years ago, it won't work. We had a different approach. And it was. We went to the meetings, we never knew what was going to take place. We never knew how long we were going to talk. But as the numbers increased, we finally had to put some guidelines and some time limits. We met at the 3 labs, 3 areas, slept wherever you could put a sleeping bag or whatever. Each one provided the meals. Went to Maryland, we could look forward to crabs and some oysters. And Virginia was the same way. When they came down here, we threw in some extra shrimp to go along with the oysters and crabs. We had a great time. And it was a lot of fun. So the society was to be an informal gathering. There was to be no news media. No administrators were to be allowed to participate. At that first meeting, April 15th in Morehead City. I said there were 22 of us. It was a Friday afternoon, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We gathered on the second floor of the old administration building. And meanwhile, Gene and Van Engel and others had drawn up a constitution, which we discussed. Gene was elected the first president. When we went to vote on the secretary, treasurer, as was combined office, there was a tie between Gene Roloffs and Wilbur Van Engel. And something happened I've never seen before. They flipped a coin. The coin spun around and stood on edge. I don't know, boy, that's some kind of an omen right there. Well, somebody knocked the coin over and Van Engel got to be secretary. The thing I'd like to say is, what was it like back in those days? So that if you're disgusted and discouraged with the situation as you find it, listen to what took place. In the first place, many considered us as being temporary existence. I remember Captain John Nelson, who'd been the Fisheries Commissioner for 40 years here in North Carolina, cautioning me and arguing with me and discouraging me from buying a piece of property to build a house. I wasn't going to be here for about 4 years, you're going to be gone. That was to be the extent and the limit of the research activities. They'd had experiences in the past with studies on weakfish and oysters, which were simply surveys that were made, and that was what they looked upon us as being. In the immediate environment, we had the Duke Marine Laboratory, which was a summer station. Harold Hum was the resident director, and faculty came down from the campus, bringing up microscopes and bottles and jars as needed, and then packed up and back before September. The Bureau of Fisheries lab was pretty well defunct, and it wasn't until Atkinson and the others, Howard, came in and rejuvenated it, and then the Institute of Marine Sciences, which was in fisheries in 1947, started. We were to be a year-round operation. And there was always that confusion as to who worked where. In fact, a good number of folks in the community called me Dr. Coslow. I don't know how to take that. But John and I were active in community affairs. He was responsible for all these plaques going up on all these houses with the dates on them. And I was chairman of the county school board, and together we put our efforts together to get a bond passed through and build a couple of brand new high schools and other schools. So there was always this confusion. And then those of us that had been in bivalve, we were called oyster doctor. My wife, my bride and I were walking down the street in Fort Norris, not that there was anything to see there particularly, but walking on, this old timer stopped and said, "You're the new oyster doctor here, eh?" I said, "Yeah." Looked at Janet and said, "You're the new oyster doctor, Mrs., I guess." Here was expanded to fish doctors and shrimp doctors and so on. And in fact, some of the locals there at Bival would come by the office, want to know if we could write out a prescription for them. I never attempted it, you know. And so a few years later, after I arrived here, I was gone into the hospital for a checkup. The nurse came in and said, "What kind of a doctor are you now?" Well, I couldn't resist that one. I said, "When I get through examining my patients, I eat them." Nobody overheard her going down the hall saying, "Don't ask him what kind of a doctor." A lot of this was new to many people. Ecology was not a household term as it is now. When I went into that hospital, I had the book. This was Gene Odom's book on ecology, and I had it lying by my bed. And there was every nurse that came in, every doctor said, "What's that?" They'd never heard of it. Is that some kind of a new disease? So that's where we were. There were no computers. In fact, in many meetings, I was sitting next to Don Pritchard. He always had a yellow pad. And boy, here were all these mathematical hieroglyphics that he was going through, writing them as fast as he could write till he filled the whole pad through. I guess now with a computer, you do it in about 3 or 4 minutes. There were no electron microscopes. If you want to search the literature, you had to go through the tedious process of bioabstracts. That was all we had. There was no money. In fact, at bivalve, the situation was so bad that we took 1 day a week, and the assistant and I, we'd comb the shores of Delaware Bay, loading the boat. We had a 37-foot crab boat with driftwood, which we'd cut up for firewood, and that was what we burned to keep warm in a hot stove. We went to titrate the salinity samples. They were pre-chilled to the point where ice crystals began to form. You could look down through the floor, see the tight. So don't think you've got it bad. Bob Luntz down at Bears Bluff Lab built the lab there at Walkalaw Island, concrete block building. He had 2 assistants. One's name was January and the other was Molasses. Every time I saw them, they were reclining under one of those great big live oak trees. If he wanted the lab, that was how he built it. Our budget to start with was less than $50,000. My salary when I went to bivalve was $2,600 a year. And we got married. My wife said, "Well, we'll put 1 check aside and save it." I don't know whatever happened to that one. Statistical approaches were rapidly gaining. I think we had a tendency to study individual species. I think it came to the realization that an oyster is not an individual. He's living in the community. You've got to look at the overall picture that's involved. You've got to look at the environment. I think when Don Pritchard and his crowd came, I think they were going to solve all the problems in the distribution of larvae because they looked at these larvae as inert particles. Next thing I knew, a couple of them were going up to Woods Hole to take some courses in marine biology and vertebrates. Found out that these larvae have a mind of their own, so to speak, and react to different situations. There was no sea grant in those days. Those of us that were dependent on state appropriations felt obligated to work on commercial species. And what we were doing through the sea grant program. So all that money came sea grant, instead of going to us, went to somebody else. We felt obligated that would be the center of our attention. Well, I give you a very brief outline as to what it used to be like. My grandchildren from time to time call up and say, "Granddad, what was it like during the Depression?" That was what it was like when we first started out. $2,600 a year. $2,600 wasn't much. But came here to Moorhead, and I think it was up to $4,000. I could buy a house for $6,000. My monthly payments were $50 a month, and that included payments, insurance, and everything else. A little bit of a story now. It's encouraging to see AERS grow. Because, I think back in the figures back there, in 1968 there were 285 members. And from the list I see now, there are some 527.